Joining me now from Washington is Christopher Sands. He's the Director of Canadian Studies at the School of Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins University in Washington. Christopher Sands, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Well, we are hearing reports today, and you're seeing the same reports, about Democratic Representative Bill Pascrell from New Jersey. He's saying that some of his Democratic colleagues, he and some of his colleagues in Congress, are going to need more assurances before they're going to be able to vote for the USMCA. What do you make of it? What are you hearing?
Well, we're starting to hear more and more of that from the Democrats. According to the trade promotion legislation that authorized the Trump administration to negotiate a new NAFTA, the House has to be the place where the legislation to implement the deal is introduced. It's considered a money bill, so it has to start in the House of Representatives. With the Democrats controlling the House of Representatives, they control the timing. There's no clock on when they start the process. Once they start the process, 45 days before the relevant committee of jurisdiction, which is the House Ways and Means Committee, and then you have 15 days in front of the wider House of Representatives chamber, and then things get reported out. So that gives the Democrats a crucial bit of control over when all of this starts. And so what we're starting to hear, and we saw this a little bit during the negotiations, is members are signaling what it will take for them to push for what the president wants, which is to get this ratified. On the other side, the problem, and I think this is what Democrats will have to contend with as we get closer to 2019, is that the president will put tremendous pressure on them, possibly suggesting that if we don't get a USMCA deal ratified, it'll weaken our hand in negotiating with China. And the China trade conflict is much more, in a way, popular, not the conflict, but the idea of taking China on. So he makes it a patriotic issue. The other concern is that Donald Trump may have everything he wants in just having the deal signed at the end of November, that he'll tell Democrats, I did a great deal, but you're keeping it from the people. And he runs in 2020 saying that Democrats ruined a really better deal than NAFTA. I'm not sure the Democrats are prepared for that. So there's a limit to how much of this gamesmanship we can see. But the key is that unless Democrats are satisfied, we won't introduce this into the House of Representatives. So the whole process of making it law will not actually take place.
Yeah, and the other detail about Bill Pascrell is that supposedly he's going to be, or he's in line, or he's rumored to be the new chair of the subcommittee of the Ways and Means Committee, so the trade subcommittee on the Ways and Means Committee. He would have a crucial role. Also, in terms of the types of concerns, they're raising concerns about content and enforcement, and a lot of the suggestions that they're looking at the auto provisions in Mexico. Are you hearing anything similar to that as well?
Well, those are very specific signals. So one of the things the legislation requires is that the president, after signing, submit a package that includes a U.S. International Trade Commission assessment of the agreement overall, a labor market impact plan, an environmental impact plan, and an enforcement plan. And so by signaling very specifically they're concerned about those elements, what Congressman Pascrell is sending is a message that we want to see this in your total submission package. So I think it's a little bit of shadow boxing or communicating over the transom in the hopes that what Congress ultimately gets includes concerns like Congressman Pascrell's. And Mexico is going to be the tricky bit. I think we went in, the U.S. Trade Representative said, we want to have a minimum wage for Mexican automotive workers folded into the rule of origin. Rule of origin is already a very complicated area, especially in autos because a car is so complex. And so there is a lot of concern that you're really mixing apples and oranges when you add labor cost rate as a factor, not just the content of a piece of automotive equipment as part of your overall calculation of the rule of origin or the percentage of origin, which is North American of a total vehicle. So he may be signaling unhappiness, but what he may also be signaling is how exactly is this going to work? I'm skeptical that you can make this work in any way functionally on a day-to-day basis for the auto sector. And so that'll be a real concern. They don't want just a window dressing commitment from Mexico that, yes, we'll pay higher wages when in fact they don't.
Yeah, I mean, a legitimate concern in the sense that, as you touch on, I mean, how do you enforce the fact that a certain percentage of automobiles sold in the United States, if they're produced in Mexico, a certain percentage of them have to be produced in jurisdictions where they're paying $16 an hour or more. So you have to test the wages, you have to test the percentage of automobiles coming from those jurisdictions. The enforcement is quite baffling.
Yeah, the enforcement will be very baffling. And I think that's one of the criticisms of the USMCA that we've already started to hear from the business community. Not necessarily a concern with the outcome, but with the compliance cost of living under this new set of rules. And I think one of the things that that should caution everyone about is if it turns out that it's too onerous to meet all the requirements of the USMCA, companies will look to see if they can bring parts and vehicles in under the, say, World Trade Organization, WTO bound rate, which for automotive parts right now is 2.5% for the US. So that would be a lower cost maybe to pay that amount rather than paying the cost of compliance with the new rules. On top of which, they're so complex, they're not very transparent. And so for many people who watch the industry who are concerned, say in the labor unions around automotive, they're worried that they're not going to be able to tell, that the companies will have done all the math inside, kind of inside the firm, and it will be very difficult for anyone to be sure that they're actually meeting their obligations.
It is interesting, though. What you raise is quite amazing, really, as an assertion, and there's no reason to believe it wouldn't be true. And that is that for President Trump, the battle's already done. I mean, he's got his deal, and now Congress can be, Congress will do what it can, and he has a way around it. No matter what, he can argue that Congress is being obstructionist, but he's going to take a political benefit from it by playing it. Let's look at the other aspect, and that's the signing of the agreement. This weekend in Paris, our Prime Minister Trudeau, said that he was hopeful that the agreement will be signed by the three executive leaders, the two presidents and him, by the 30th of November in Buenos Aires at the G20 summit. What are you hearing in Washington? Do you think, I mean, we're still waiting for any sort of confirmation of whether that might happen or not?
Well, November 30th has been the key date for a while now because of the Mexican political timetable and a little bit the American statutory timetable. So the Mexican component of it is that the new Mexican president-elect, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, he's inaugurated on December 1st. He is known to be a critic of big business and a skeptic about free trade. And so going into this negotiation, when he won the election at the beginning of July, he said to the current government of Enrique Peña Nieto, negotiate all you want. I don't want to sign this deal. But if it's signed before I come in, I'll make sure that the Congress passes it and will put it into law. So that's a political deal between the outgoing and the incoming Mexican government, but it was enough to get the United States to try to get the signing done on the 30th in order to meet that timetable. That signing then triggers another set of deliverable deadlines for the administration, which should complete sometime at the end of January or the beginning of February. So that gets us the early part of the timetable on the process.
There's another aspect that we're looking at from up here too, and that is that we know that the Mexicans have said on the record that they're expecting, or they want, the tariffs on steel and aluminum to be removed before any signing. Our Prime Minister has not been categorical, but he's saying that he's hoping it would be removed before November 30th. But then the suggestion up here is that our Prime Minister is so concerned about possible auto tariffs that he wants to see it signed because there's a side letter which would basically exempt Canada and Mexico from auto tariffs, and he would rather see the security of no auto tariffs as opposed to the going to bat over getting rid of the aluminum and steel tariffs.
I think that's probably a very pragmatic calculation. The difference between the auto tariffs and the steel and aluminum tariffs is where they are in the process. Right now, the U.S. Department of Commerce is still doing the investigation on whether there's justification of a national security tariff on autos imported from other countries, including Canada and Mexico. So right now, that's just a potential threat, but it's a huge potential threat. 25% would be quite an add-on to the value of cars. It would make Canadian production almost useless in terms of origin because of all the additional costs involved. So for that reason, he wants to head that off. Now, steel and aluminum tariffs have already gone through that process. They've been imposed. They can be lifted. There's another process for that. And what the U.S. has been telling Canada and Mexico is, we understand your concerns, but the process of lifting it is not as easy as an executive order. We're going through the process. We're taking a look at it. We hope to be able to do something in the near term. Because I think the Trudeau government knows those timelines may not perfectly sync, they've been unwilling to say, if you don't get rid of these, we won't sign, because they want to meet the timeline, and they also, as you say, don't want to run the risk that the whole thing falls apart and they get hit with automotive tariffs as well.
Right. What do we make of the difference, though, then in between the Canadian and Mexican positions? The Mexicans seem to be saying categorically they won't do it if the tariffs aren't removed by November 30th.
I think the Mexicans are reading the U.S. process a little bit differently, in part because for them, the real fear is that if it goes into the López Obrador administration after December 1st, that administration so far has said, we're not going to reopen any of the USMCA. We're not going to ask for new deals as long as it's done before we take over. López Obrador is also mad about steel and aluminum tariffs, although Mexico is not a big producer of aluminum. They have some effect on steel. So their concern really is just to get past that moment and have everything settled. I think that's one of the reasons that they've said take away these tariffs, not just for Mexico, but for Canada as well, because they want to see this deal settled just as soon as possible. But even after it's signed, we have this ratification process with the U.S. going first. Some of my best Canadian trade law experts advising me have been saying, well, even if Canada goes through and passes it in the House, passes it in the Senate, sends it to royal assent, it'll be up to Cabinet to decide when it takes effect in Canada.
Right.
So Canada may hold off USMCA enactment until the U.S. has gone ahead and gotten rid of steel and aluminum tariffs. So there may be a second set of deadlines that the Trudeau government is conscious of, that it might be able to have a stick over the Americans a little bit later in the year.
Okay, interesting. Well, listen, Christopher Sands, always a pleasure. Thank you very much for taking the time. And we'll be in contact. We'll watch this, obviously, with great interest. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you.